The fluorescent hum filled the late-night lab, steady as my pulse under pressure. Rain tapped the windows like impatient fingers, blurring the city lights outside. We sat side by side at the cluttered bench, reviewing data sheets under the harsh glow, her pen scratching notes beside mine. But her gaze held too long, tracing my hand as I marked a graph, pulling at the quiet simmer between us. This thesis bound us tight, deadlines looming, professors watching every output. One slip, and the professional wall we'd built could crack, spilling desires we'd buried deep. Then her voice cut the silence, low and direct. "Are you ever going to look away?" My breath caught, the air thickening with what we'd both ignored for months. I stepped onto the campus that first fall, the mid-sized city pressing close around it, horns blaring from nearby streets, buildings stacked tight like they shared secrets through the walls. Orientation unfolded in a crowded auditorium, the air thick with coffee steam and fresh notebooks, everyone shifting in plastic seats that creaked under new weight. I'd come here chasing ambition, knees locked tight as I signed up for the Advanced Environmental Research Program, the kind that promised real stakes if you pushed hard enough. The city felt alive, electric, but it carried an edge. Rumors of cutthroat departments, eyes always scanning for weakness. The first lab meeting hit a week later, the room humming with equipment vents and the low whir of computers booting up. I scanned the space for connections, chairs scraping as people settled around the long oak table, scarred from years of use. Notebooks flipped open, pens clicking, the scent of dry erase markers hanging sharp. Across from me, she sat with her posture straight, focused, shoulders squared under a simple gray sweater that clung just enough to hint at the lines beneath. Her dark hair fell forward as she reviewed the syllabus, fingers tapping the edge of her folder in a steady rhythm that drew my eye without meaning to. We were paired early, thesis partners, on a water quality project that demanded late hours and shared data. The handshake came quick during introductions, her fingers firm and cool against mine, grip lingering a beat as our eyes met, unflinching. "Looking forward to this," she said, voice even, but her palm pressed, deliberate, sending a faint warmth up my arm that I shook off fast. I nodded, burying the pull under talk of methodologies, the program's grind already weighing heavy. Ambition drove me here, not distractions, but her presence stuck. The way she leaned into questions, neck taut as she concentrated on the prof's lecture. Weeks blurred into routine lab sessions, the city commute, a daily grind of buses rumbling through traffic, dropping me at the edge of campus where brick paths wound tight between lecture halls. We'd claim the same corner bench each time, proximity building slow, her elbow brushing mine as we pored over samples, the cool glass vials clinking soft between us. I'd catch myself watching her hands, precise as they pipetted solutions, veins standing out against her skin in the lab's pale light. She noticed once, mid-experiment, her voice dropping low. "Steady there, don't spill it." The words hung simple, but her glance flicked to my face, holding just long enough to thicken the air. Internal conflict gnawed quiet. Attraction simmered guarded, tucked under stacks of printouts and deadline checklists, my pulse quickening at her nearness, but shoved down hard. The program demanded focus. Professors circling like hawks, peers competing for funding nods, and I couldn't afford the slip. Yet her habits pulled at me. The way she'd tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, exposing the curve of her jaw, or how her breath stayed steady across the shared desk, even as frustration creased her brow over faulty readings. We'd share surface details during breaks, her commute stories from the city's edge, the pressure of family calls expecting straight-A results, mirroring my own city-rooted drive to prove something. But her questions probed subtle. "What keeps you up at night on this?" she'd ask, eyes steady, unflinching, as if reading the silences I carried, like extra weight in my bag. The lab's hum became our rhythm. Isolation creeping in as sessions stretched past closing, the building emptying to echoes in the halls. Proximity amplified it. The warmth from her chair seeping close, her pen tapping a beat that matched my own rising tension. I pulled back when I could, focusing on graphs, but curiosity drew her nearer. her corrections on my notes delivered with a hand brushing the paper near mine. Voice low. Try it this way. The contact sparked, brief, gone before it registered. But it lingered in my chest, body betraying the calm I clung to. Those early weeks rooted us in the work, desires hidden deep as the city's undercurrents, waiting for the right pressure to surface. Assignment came sharp in the second lab meeting, the professor's voice cutting through the room's low hum as he paired us for the high-stakes environmental study, tracking urban water contaminants in the city's runoff, data that could feed into real policy if we nailed it. Stakes hung heavy from the start, funding tied to results, presentations to department heads who scanned every graph for flaws. We nodded across the table, her eyes meeting mine steady, a silent agreement settling in the space between our chairs. The project bound us closer than I'd expected, daily lab hours stretching like the traffic outside, pulling us into a rhythm that felt both necessary and charged. The lab air thickened with chemical scents, acrid tang of reagents mixing with the faint metallic bite from the spectrometers whirring in the corner. Keyboard clicks punctuated the quiet, our fingers tapping in uneven sync as we logged initial samples, screens casting blue glows on our faces. We'd claim the backbench each afternoon, the wood scarred from pipettes and spills, her setup mirroring mine. Laptop open, notebook stacked neat, a single coffee mug steaming between us. Her corrections started subtle, voice low as she leaned over my notes during the first data run. Here, adjust the pH baseline, she'd say, her pen circling a figure, hand brushing the paper near mine, the warmth of her knuckles grazing my finger for a split second. I felt it linger, a faint heat that pulled my focus from the numbers, but I nodded, rewriting the line while her breath stayed even across the desk. I watched her habits form patterns, the way her neck went taut when she concentrated, muscles shifting under her skin as she peered into the microscope, adjusting the slide with precise twists. Her steady breath carried soft in the enclosed space, rising and falling without rush, even as frustration edged her brow over inconsistent readings from the city's polluted streams. It drew me in quiet, my own pulse quickening to match when she'd pause, stretching her arms overhead, sweater pulling tight across her shoulders. I'd look away fast, back to the vials, but the image stuck. The line of her collarbone exposed briefly, skin pale under the fluorescent glare. Surface details slipped into our talks during lulls, the program's pressures weaving through like the horns blaring from the street below. She'd share her commute stories, voice dropping against the vent's hum. Buses packed tight with morning crowds, the jolt of stops mirroring the deadlines that kept us here past dusk. It's like the city's pulse, she'd say, eyes flicking to the window where rain streaked the glass, blurring tail lights into red smears. I'd mirror back my own, subway rides from the edge of downtown, the crush of bodies pressing close, echoing the isolation of pushing through this grind alone before her. Family calls weighed on her too, expectations of top marks clashing with the late nights. Her tone steady, but edged when she mentioned it. They think it's just books and tests, she'd murmur, fingers drumming the bench, close enough I caught the faint scent of her lotion, clean and citrus sharp. Her questions probed deeper, subtle at first, eyes unflinching as they held mine over shared screens. What pulls your focus like this project does? She'd ask, during a calibration break, leaning back in her chair, the wood creaking soft under her weight. The words hung simple, but her gaze searched, pulling at the silences I kept tucked away, the hidden aches beneath my drive. I'd answer careful. Ambition from city roots, the need to prove ground in a department full of skeptics. But her nod came slow, as if reading the layers I didn't voice. Once, mid-experiment, her hand steadied the flask near mine, fingers overlapping brief on the glass. Steady, she whispered, breath warm against my ear, the contact sending a quiet jolt up my arm. I pulled back slight, but she didn't. Her touch deliberate, eyes locking until the moment stretched thin. Those interactions built the partnership, slow. The lab, our enclosed world, where professional lines blurred at the edges. We'd debate methodologies late into afternoons, voices low to not carry to the front benches. Her arguments firm but open, drawing me out. The air felt heavier then, charged with the click of keys and the soft clink of tools, her presence amplifying every shift. The way she'd tuck her hair, exposing her neck, again, or how her knee nudged mine under the bench during long reads, warmth seeping through denim. I buried the pull deeper, focusing on contaminant charts, but it simmered, body betraying with a quickened beat when her laugh broke rare and real over a breakthrough reading. Late nights started creeping in as data piled, sessions extending past the building's hush, isolation amplifying the quiet pulls between us. The city lights flickered on outside, casting shadows across the bench, and we'd pack up, reluctant, her voice cutting the silence. Tomorrow, then. The words carried weight, her glance lingering as we stepped into the emptying halls, the tension coiling tighter in the dark. Deadlines pressed in like the city's fog rolling off the river, forcing us into tighter collaboration. We'd migrate from the lab to the dim study rooms in the library annex, those cramped spaces with walls lined in faded corkboards and single bulbs casting long shadows over scarred tables. The air hung stale there, laced with the must of old books and the faint buzz of vending machines down the hall. We'd spread our diagrams wide, pencils scratching across graph paper, her presence pulling the room smaller each session. Her pen tapped a steady rhythm on the edge of the table, the sound syncing with the distant rumble of trains cutting through the night. It anchored me at first, a focus point amid the contaminant models we built line by line, but it grated, too, pulling my eyes to her hand, the way her fingers gripped the barrel, knuckles whitening slight under the pressure. The warmth from her adjacent chair seeped close, her knee brushing mine under the low table as we leaned over the same sketch. I'd shift away, but the space allowed no real distance, our elbows nudging during hurried erasures, the heat lingering on my skin like a question unanswered. Accidental contacts piled up, each one sparking quiet. Mid-diagram, sketching flow paths for the runoff data, her elbow caught mine as she reached for the ruler, the nudge firm enough to jolt the pencil from my grip. It rolled across the table, stopping near her palm, and she caught it without looking, fingers closing over mine brief in the retrieve. The touch burned, skin to skin for that split second, her coolness contrasting the flush rising in my chest. I pulled back, mumbling about the line angles, but my pulse quickened, body betraying the calm I forced into my voice. She didn't comment, just handed it over, her gaze flicking up unflinching, holding mine until I looked down again. Dialogue started hinting at edges, words slipping past the professional veil. We'd debate sample depths, her voice low against the room's hush. "We need to get deeper into the data," she'd say, leaning forward, her breath stirring the pages between us. The phrase landed simple, tied to filtration rates. But her eyes stayed on mine a beat too long, the suggestion hanging in the air like the steam from her cooling tea. I'd nod, throat tight, adding notes to cover the hitch in my breath, but it echoed in my head later. The way her lips shaped the words, the subtle curve of her mouth pulling at something buried. My internal storm brewed constant, the pull coiling tighter with every shared hour. I'd catch myself staring at the line of her jaw as she concentrated, the way her neck tensed when a model didn't align, muscles shifting under her skin in the dim light. Pulse hammered low whenever she shifted closer, her chair scraping soft, warmth radiating through the thin space. I'd tell myself it was the pressure, deadlines stacking like unread emails, professors' emails pinging sharp reminders. But my body knew better, heat pooling unbidden at her nearness, focus fracturing on the graphs. I'd pull back from her gaze when it locked too steady, turning to the window where city lights smeared against the glass. But curiosity drew her nearer each time, her questions probing the silences. "You go quiet on these projections," she'd note, pen pausing, her foot nudging mine accidental under the table. The contact lingered, denim to denim, until I moved, but the air thickened, charged with what neither voiced. Boundaries failed in fragments, the professional wall cracking under the weight of proximity. One evening, as rain started pattering the roof, we pored over a faulty simulation, her hand covering mine on the mouse to scroll through the error logs. Fingers curled deliberate over my knuckles, guiding the click, the pressure steady and warm. I froze, breath shallow, the screen blurring as her thumb brushed my skin absent. "See the spike here?" she murmured, voice close to my ear, the words vibrating soft. I nodded but didn't pull away, the moment stretching until she did, straightening with a casual stretch that pulled her sweater taut across her shoulders. The denial came quick in my head. Focus on the work, the stakes too high for slips. But her eyes met mine again, curiosity flickering raw, drawing me back despite the gnaw of risk. Department eyes loomed outside our bubble, peers glancing in the halls, whispers about funding cuts sharpening the edge. One wrong glance caught and the partnership could fracture. Theses derailed in a program this cutthroat. Yet the failed pulls cycled, her presence amplifying every shift, the tap of her pen, the warmth seeping close, the nudge that lingered. Isolation deepened as sessions ran late, the library emptying to echoes, our voices the only sound breaking the hush. Then the storm hit full one evening, wind rattling the windows as thunder grumbled low over the city skyline. Rain lashed the glass in sheets, trapping us in the study room's glow, the building locked down tight. Power flickered once, bulbs humming unsteady, and we sat side by side, knees brushing in the tight space. Words turned personal then, her voice dropping against the downpour. "This pressure, it gets to you, doesn't it?" The question hung, pulling truths we'd skirted for weeks. Rain lashed the windows in relentless sheets, the storm's fury turning the study room into a cocoon of red emergency glow when the power flickered out. The bulb overhead died with a faint pop, plunging us into shadow, only the exit signs casting their dim crimson light across the table, painting our hands in bloodied hues as we sat frozen. Outside, thunder cracked sharp over the city, wind howling through the building's cracks, rattling the door like it wanted in. We shifted to the lab stools nearby, dragged them close to the bench for the shared laptop's dying battery glow, knees brushing in the tight space, denim against denim, the contact immediate and unyielding. Her warmth seeped through, steady against the chill seeping from the floor, and I didn't pull away. The storm's isolation locking us here. Words we'd skirted, now pressing like the downpour. She slumped against the bench first, elbows on the scarred wood, her breath coming uneven in the hush. The red light caught the line of her jaw, taut still from the day's tension, but her eyes softened, flicking to the window where rain blurred the skyline to a smear. "This project's eating me alive," she started, voice low against the thunder's rumble, fingers tracing the edge of a notebook absent. But it deepened quick, pulling at the threads we'd left loose. Family expectations clashed hard in her words, spilling raw. Parents back in the suburbs, calls every week demanding perfection, the straight path they'd mapped. Degree, job, the kind of life that fit their mold without questions. "They see the grades, the resume," she murmured, hand clenching the paper's corner, knuckles paling under the glow. "But not this. The pull that's always there, hidden under the drive." Her gaze met mine then, unflinching in the dim, vulnerability cracking through the focus she'd worn like armor. Desires she'd buried deep, the Sapphic ache that didn't align with their script, surfacing now in the storm's cover. Her voice trembling, slight as thunder rolled again. I listened, chest tightening with the echo of it, the red light warming her skin to something intimate. Close. Her knee pressed firmer against mine, the nudge deliberate now, anchoring as she leaned in, the air between us thick with wet earth scent drifting through the vents. Empathy rose unbidden, mirroring the weight she carried, my own truths bubbling up in the isolation. City roots had taught me hiding early. Subway crowds where glances lingered but never landed. The academic world a sharper cage with its hierarchies and watchful eyes. "I've felt that grain my whole life," I said, words steady but edged, shifting on the stool so our arms brushed, the contact sparking quiet heat. Sapphic pulls tangled in my chest, buried under Theses and grants, the fear of department whispers fracturing the progress I'd clawed for. Here, it's like breathing against the current, wanting women, but the program's eyes scan every move, waiting for a slip. Vulnerability spilled from me then, raw in the hush, the storm drowning any echo, her presence pulling it out like the rain stripping the streets bare. Touch escalated slow, her hand finding my arm for emphasis as I spoke, fingers curling firm around my bicep, the pressure grounding through my sleeve. "That sounds heavy," she whispered, thumb tracing absent along the fabric seam, the motion deliberate, sending warmth coiling up my arm, pulse quickening under her palm. I didn't move, breath hitching as her grip tightened slight, the red glow catching the curve of her fingers, nails short and practical from lab work. Her eyes held mine, curiosity flickering raw, the contact lingering longer than the words, body language betraying the professional veil we'd clung to. I mirrored it, my hand resting on her knee brief, feeling the muscle tense under denim, the heat radiating steady. The storm amplified it, thunder vibrating the floor, our knees locked now, the tight space leaving no retreat. Suggestive exchange built in the charged quiet, her whisper cutting close as lightning flashed outside, illuminating her face in stark white. "You've been watching too closely," she said, breath warm against my ear, the words hanging simple but loaded, tied to the lab hours, but pulling deeper. Her thumb stilled on my arm, pressing firmer, the intimacy of it coiling low in my gut, desire simmering, guarded but undeniable. I turned slight, our faces inches apart. Her scent, citrus lotion mixed with the day's coffee, filling the space. Lips parting as if to answer. "Maybe I have," I murmured back, voice dropping to match, hand sliding up her arm to her shoulder, fingers brushing the sweater's edge, feeling the warmth of her neck beneath. The confession hung electric, her eyes darkening in the red light, vulnerability binding us tighter, the storm's rage fading to a steady drum as truth settled between us. Power hung back on sudden, lights flickering to life harsh overhead, shattering the cocoon with fluorescent glare. We pulled apart for action, hands dropping, but the rhythm lingered, knees still brushing as we packed notes in silence, the air heavier now with what we'd voiced. The storm eased to drizzle as we stepped out, city streets slick under sodium lamps, and she nodded to her car parked tight in the lot. "Ride?" The offer came casual, but her glance pulled, deepening the pull as we climbed in, dashboard lights casting shadows across her profile, the drive-through wet avenues weaving us closer in the confined cab. Post-lab drives wove into our rhythm quick, the city's streets slick under tires after those extended sessions, dashboard lights flickering shadows across her face as she navigated the tight avenues. We'd climb into her compact car parked in the shadowed lot, the door creaking shut behind me, sealing us in the close cab where the air held traces of rain and the faint chemical tang from our bags. Her hands gripped the wheel steady, knuckles paling slight at stoplights. But on turns, her right hand dropped to the gear shift, fingers brushing near my knee. Accidental at first, the denim barrier thin against the warmth radiating from her palm. I'd shift fraction, but the space allowed no real pullback. Her touch lingering a beat too long, sending quiet heat at my thigh each time the engine hummed low through intersections. Conversations probed deeper in that confined hum. The wipers slapping rhythm against lingering drizzle, her voice cutting soft over the radio's murmur. Doubts about her straight assumptions surfaced hesitant. Words tumbling as we idled at red lights, her eyes flicking to the rear view before settling on the road. "Everyone sees the path laid out. Degree, the right partner, no detours," she'd say, hand tightening on the shift. Close enough, I felt the shift in air. But confusion edged her tone. The boyfriend mentions from early talks feeling distant now, like echoes from the lab's vents. It never fit right, that assumption. Like wearing someone else's coat. Her vulnerability spilled raw, mirroring the Sapphic pull she'd confessed in the storm, her straight facade cracking further under the dashboard glow. I'd nod, sharing my guarded aches in fragments. The city's crowds that hid glances but never eased the isolation of wanting women in a world that scanned for slips. "It's like navigating these streets blind," I'd murmur, voice dropping against the engine's rumble. One wrong turn, and eyes turned sharp. Empathy bound us then, her knee nudging mine deliberate on a curve, the contact anchoring the truths we traded, breath sinking uneven in the cab's warmth. Body details pulled my focus constant, the passing streetlights tracing the line of her jaw, casting it sharp then soft in fleeting glows, the curve tightening as she concentrated on traffic. I'd catch the scent of her soap, clean, faintly floral, rising with the heat from the vents, mixing with the leather seats worn smooth under my palms. Her hair escaped its tie sometimes, strands curling damp against her neck from the humid night, and I'd trace it, silent, pulse quickening at the exposed skin, pale under sodium lamps. Once, at a long light, her hand brushed my thigh, outright shifting gears, fingers curling brief over denim, the pressure firm enough to hitch my breath. She didn't pull away immediate, eyes flicking to mine, electric, holding the moment until horns blared behind. "Sorry," she'd mutter, but her glance lingered, curiosity flickering raw, pulling at the tension we'd laughed off before. Normalization attempts crumbled under those glances. Laughs forced light when the air thickened too much. We'd joke about the project's glitches, faulty sensors like bad dates, deadlines chasing like taxis in rush hour, but her eyes would hold mine across the console, unflinching, the humor fading quick to something heavier. "You're staring again," she'd say once, voice low with a half smile, hand hovering near my knee as she accelerated. I'd laugh it off, turning to the window where buildings blurred, but the electric charge stayed, body betraying with heat low in my gut, her presence amplifying every shift. The tap of her thumb on the wheel, the steady rise of her chest under her sweater. Fear gnawed at edges, department gossip a shadow in the rear view. But the rides normalized the pulls slow, her doubts and my aches weaving tighter. No real escape in the city's loop. Notes started appearing in my bag midweek, her scrawl tucked under notebooks or clipped to pens, tight loops inviting extra review sessions, words simple but loaded. "Library, 8 p.m., need your eyes on this." The ink pressed deliberate, like her hand on the shift, and I'd find them after drives, heart thudding as I unfolded in my apartment's quiet, the paper carrying faint traces of her lotion. One read, "Can't shake that look from the storm." Her admission raw, pulling me back to the cab's warmth, the knee brushes that lingered. I'd show up each time, the sessions charging the air thicker, her arrival shifting the library's hush to something intimate, eyes meeting across tables with unspoken weight. After-hours library corners became our hidden ground, the stacks rising like walls around us, enclosing the space in a hush broken only by the distant turn of pages from late-night stragglers. We'd claim the far alcove each time, a scarred oak table tucked between shelves heavy with bound journals, the air thick with the must of aged paper and faint dust motes drifting in the low lamp's glow. Review sessions stretched long there, drafts spread wide under our elbows, printouts of contaminant models, revisions marked in red ink that bled slight into the margins. We'd sit side by side, chairs pulled close in the tight nook, her leg pressing mine under the table from the start, the denim barrier warm and unyielding, her knee nudging deliberate as she leaned over a paragraph. The contact anchored, heat seeping steady through fabric, pulling my focus from the text to the steady shift of her thigh against mine, breath quickening in the enclosed quiet. Dialogue built slow in that intimacy, her questions probing my silences like fingers testing a knot. We'd debate phrasing on the methodology section, voices low to not carry past the shelves, but she paused mid-sentence, eyes flicking to mine unflinching. "You go quiet when we hit these projections," she'd say, pen hovering over the page, her foot hooking light around my ankle under the table, the pull subtle but insistent. The words tied to the data, urban runoff spikes that defied our models, but her tone edged deeper, curiosity drawing out the layers I held back, the hidden aches beneath the academic drive. I'd answer careful at first, tracing the graph lines to ground myself, but she'd admit her own confusion then, voice dropping against the shelf's shadow. "My focus splits lately. On the work, on this," she'd murmur, leg pressing firmer, the warmth coiling low in my gut. Straight assumptions frayed in her confessions, the program's straight lines clashing with the Sapphic pull she'd named in the storm, her gaze holding mine raw. Vulnerability flickering as thunder from earlier rains echoed faint outside. "It confuses me, wanting to watch you like this." The admission hung electric, her breath stirring the pages, pulling truths from me in fragments. The isolation of desires in this cutthroat grind, eyes always scanning for weakness. Physical turns escalated in the charged hush, her hand covering mine on the page during a revision pass, fingers curling deliberate over my knuckles as she guided the pen to a correction. The pressure was steady, warm, skin to skin where sleeves rode up, her thumb brushing the back of my hand, absent but not, tracing a vein that thrummed under her touch. I froze, pulse hammering, the ink blurring slight as her grip tightened, guiding the line slow across the paper. "Like that," she whispered, breath close to my ear. The words simple but loaded, her fingers interlacing, brief, nails short from lab grips pressing into my palm. Heat surged, body betraying with a hitch in my breath, her scent, floral soap faint under the day's coffee, rising sharp in the alcove's closeness. She'd hold it a beat too long, eyes darkening as they met mine over the draft, curiosity raw. Then release, slow. But the echo lingered, my skin tingling where her warmth had pressed. Internal storm raged constant, fear of department gossip gnawing at the edges like the library's drafts through cracked windows. Whispers traveled fast in these halls, peers noting our late exits, professors scanning partnerships for cracks that could derail funding or theses. Professional fallout loomed vast, one caught glance shattering the progress we'd built, isolation turning cage in the city's tight weave. I'd feel it coil in my chest during those touches, pulse racing against the risk, body pulling toward her even as doubt clawed. What if a door swung open, eyes landing on the leg press, the hand curl? Yet the want overrode, her presence amplifying every shift, the tap of her nail on the table, the steady rise of her chest inches away. Pullback cycles spun tight, her straightening sudden after a linger, chair scraping back fraction as denial snapped in. "Focus on the revisions," she'd say, voice even but edged, eyes darting to the shelves like checking for shadows. She'd tuck her hair behind her ear, exposing her neck, taut again, pulling my gaze despite the retreat, but her glance would betray the want, flickering back raw, curiosity warring with the mask. I'd mirror it, shifting away, but her foot would nudge mine again under the table, the cycle drawing us closer each session, touches deliberate, confessions edging bolder in the stack's cover. Project presentation neared as drafts finalized, stakes heightening with the shared stage, department heads watching, peers crowding the seminar room, our voices syncing on slides that could make or break the semester. The alcove felt smaller then, her leg pressing firmer, words turning urgent against the looming review. Conference room buzzed low that morning, the air thick with coffee steam and the shuffle of peers settling into rows of folding chairs, notebooks flipping open like wings ready to critique. Department heads lined the front, arms crossed under their jackets, eyes scanning the projector screen where our title slide glowed blue. Urban water contaminants, our names linked in bold font. We'd rehearsed late the night before in the alcove, her legs still pressing mine under the table, words sinking tight on the data flows. But now the stakes pressed real. Funding nods hanging on this defense. Whispers in the hall already probing our partnership for cracks. I felt her beside me in the wings, shoulder brushing mine as we waited, her breath steady but quickened, the warmth of her seeping through my blouse like a current I couldn't ignore. On stage, her presence amplified everything. The room's hush, pulling us into sync as we stepped forward, bodies aligned close behind the podium, her hip nudging mine subtle when we shifted for the remote, the contact brief but electric under the spotlight's glare. We'd tag-team the slides, my voice laying out the methodology while she clicked through graphs, her fingers steady on the button, nails short and clean from lab grips. But her eyes found mine each transition, unflinching across the projected data, holding a beat too long amid the contaminant spikes we'd mapped. The audience faded then, peers' nods blurring, her posture straight beside me, sweater hugging the line of her shoulders as she leaned in to point at a peak. "Here, the urban runoff hits critical," she'd say, voice low and firm, breath stirring the air near my ear, the proximity unchecked in the shared spotlight. My pulse thrummed low, body betraying with heat rising in my chest, her nearness coiling the tension we'd built in stacks and rides, every glance amplifying the pull, her jaw set focused, neck taut under the lights, drawing my gaze despite the heads watching. Questions came sharp post-talk. Professors probing the model's assumptions, peers tossing in edges about sample biases, but we fielded them tight, her responses bolstering mine seamless, hands gesturing close over the slides. The room's energy shifted then, nods turning to murmurs of approval. But the weight lingered in my gut, her foot brushing mine accidental under the podium, the nudge anchoring amid the scrutiny. We wrapped with thanks, lights dimming as the next pair prepped, but she caught my arm in the exit, fingers curling firm through my sleeve. "Prep room, quick debrief," she murmured, voice low against the chatter, pulling me down the hall to the small side space. Door clicking shut behind us, sealing out the buzz. Alone in the prep room's dim, tension peaked unchecked. The air stale with marker residue from the whiteboard, chairs pushed close to a narrow table scattered with our backup notes. She paced once, sneakers soft on the tile, then turned, eyes locking mine raw across the space. The door's lock a quiet click that amplified the hush. Proximity closed in fast, her stepping near to grab a printout, bodies aligning inches apart, her sweater's fabric brushing my arm, warmth radiating steady, like the lab's vents. I felt it coil low, pulse hammering against the wrist. Department eyes just beyond the wall, but her gaze held unflinching, curiosity flickering dark. "You've been watching all morning," she said, voice dropping low. The words hanging, simple but loaded, tied to the slides but pulling deeper. The question landed then, her face inches from mine, breath warm on my cheek. "Are you ever going to look away?" My breath caught, the air thickening electric, her eyes searching without retreat, vulnerability raw in the prep room's close. I didn't answer with words. Leaned in instead, lips brushing tentative against hers, tasting coffee's bitterness and the urgency we'd buried. Her mouth soft but yielding brief, the contact sparking heat that surged through me. Her hand found my waist, fingers pressing firm through fabric, pulling me closer for a beat, tongues brushing hesitant in the dim. Her scent, citrus faint under the day's stress, filling the space, body arching slight into mine. Immediate doubt crashed sudden, her pulling back sharp, lips glistening, eyes wide with the fracture. "We can't. This isn't," she whispered. Hand dropping cold now, mask snapping up like a door slammed. Straight assumptions flooding back in her stance. Denial edged her voice, trembling slight, the prep room feeling exposed under the fluorescent hum, risk gnawing as footsteps echoed in the hall. I nodded, throat tight, stepping away to the table, but the heat coiled unresolved, her glance flickering want despite the retreat. Aftermath lingered as we slipped out separate, hurried city walks through campus paths slick from morning mist, the unresolved pull coiling tighter in my chest, her silhouette fading into the crowd but echoing in every step. Avoidant days settled heavy in the lab after that, our passes clipped short, voices dropping to essentials as we logged final samples under the fluorescent glare. The air hung thick with unspoken weight, her chair angled fraction away from mine at the bench, the space between us a deliberate gap that echoed louder than the spectrometers were. I'd catch her glancing at the door during calibrations, eyes flicking quick before settling on the screen, her neck taut as she typed, avoiding the pull that simmered still. Proximity forced us close, elbows brushing unavoidable when reaching for vials, the contact sparking brief but cold now, her pulling back fast, warmth gone before it registered. I mirrored it, focusing on the data streams, pulse steadying against the gnaw in my chest, the kiss's echo lingering like a fault line in the models we'd built. Department eyes scanned casual in the halls, peers nodding past without probe, but the isolation amplified every shift, the click of her keyboard sharper, her breath measured across the bench, the city's horns distant through the windows like warnings we ignored. Secret notes resumed midweek, her scrawl tucked into my notebook during a shared break, paper folded tight under the stack of printouts. I found it later, unfolding in the emptying lab, her tight loops admitting the weight, raw. That moment sticks, can't shake it. Meet? The ink pressed deliberate, carrying faint traces of her lotion, pulling my breath uneven as I read, the admission cracking the avoidance we'd clung to. Another followed days later, clipped to a pen in my bag. The pull's real. Cafe, shadows by the back. Her words tumbled hesitant but direct, mirroring the vulnerability from the storm, straight mask fraying further in the hush of those lines. I'd show up each time, heart thudding against the risk, the notes a quiet bridge across the clipped air, her curiosity drawing me despite the professional dread gnawing low. We met in the campus cafe's shadows that first evening, the corner booth tucked under dim pendants, steam rising from mugs amid the low murmur of students at nearby tables. The air carried coffee's bitter edge, mixed with rain-damp coats hung on hooks. Her arriving late, coat shedding droplets as she slid in across from me, knees brushing under the low table immediate. Confessions tumbled hesitant then, her voice low against the clink of spoons, eyes meeting mine unflinching, but edged with doubt. I pulled back because it scared me. The stakes, the eyes here, she started, fingers wrapping her cup tight, steam curling between us. But denying it feels worse, like burying data that doesn't fit. Vulnerability spilled raw, her straight assumptions clashing with the Sapphic ache she'd named, the program's grind amplifying the isolation of wants that didn't align. I'd nod, sharing fragments of my own storm, the fear of fractures in this tight world, department whispers that could derail everything. But empathy bound us slow, her foot nudging mine under the table, the contact anchoring as words deepened. Body details pulled focus constant, her fingers trembling slight on the cup's rim, nails tapping uneven against porcelain, the warmth seeking my hand across the scarred wood. She'd reached midway through a pause, palm sliding over my knuckles, hesitant, thumb tracing the back of my hand, deliberate, heat coiling up my arm despite the cafe's chill. I felt her pulse through the press, quick and real, mirroring the hitch in my breath. Her skin cool from the walk, but warming steady where we touched. Her jaw tightened as she spoke, lines sharpening under the pendant's glow, strands of hair escaping to curl against her neck, drawing my gaze to the exposed curve, pulse visible, faint under her skin. The tremble in her fingers betrayed the calm she forced, vulnerability raw in the way they curled tighter around mine, pulling me closer across the table. Breath sinking, uneven in the shadows. Suggestive dialogue edged in then, her murmurs dropping lower as the cafe thinned, voices fading to background hum. "We need to explore this further, away from the benches," she'd whisper, eyes darkening on mine, the words tied to revisions but loaded, breath warm across the steam. "See where it leads. No pulling back." The suggestion hung electric, her thumb circling my knuckle absent but insistent, heat pooling low in my gut, body responding with a quiet arch despite the risk. I'd murmur back, voice matching hers. "Yeah. Deeper than the data." Hand turning to lace fingers, the intimacy coiling tighter in the booth's close. Emotional shift came gradual, vulnerability binding us as professional walls cracked slow. Her laugh breaking rare and real over a shared doubt, the touch lingering longer, empathy mirroring our hidden aches. The avoidance thawed in fragments, notes piling with bolder scrawls, meetings weaving us closer amid the city's pulse. But thesis submission loomed sharp, deadline forcing a final collaboration push. Late nights pulling us back to the lab's hum, stakes heightening with every shared glance. Final lab night pressed in with the city's weight, rain streaking the windows in relentless trails, blurring the sodium glow of streetlights into hazy smears outside. We'd claimed the back bench one last time, thesis files stacked neat between us, the air thick with the day's chemical residue and the low whir of cooling equipment settling into silence. Submission loomed at dawn, our revisions finalized in hurried clicks, but the rhythm had shifted. Her chair pulled close, no gap left, her knee pressing firm against mine under the scarred wood, warmth seeping steady through denim like an anchor in the storm. I felt her breath sync with mine, rising even across the keyboard as our hands aligned on the keys, fingers brushing deliberate during the final save. Her skin cool but grounding, pulse thrumming faint under my touch. She paused then, screen reflecting in her eyes, unflinching as she turned, the red emergency light from earlier storms long faded to this harsh fluorescent hum. Full confession spilled raw, her straight facade crumbling like wet paper under the rain's patter. I've hidden this too long. The want for you. The way it pulls against everything they expect, she murmured, voice low against the vent's hush, hand sliding over mine on the mouse, fingers lacing tight, nails pressing into my palm. Vulnerability cracked open, Sapphic truth emerging unfiltered. Her doubts about the mapped life, degree to desk job, the assumptions of straight lines, fading in the admission. You're the break I needed, the focus that fits. Her gaze held mine, curiosity raw and open, the program's grind no longer a cage but a shared path. Her thumb tracing my knuckles slow, heat coiling up my arm despite the chill seeping from the glass. Intimate exchange built in the quiet resolution. Her forehead leaning to mine, breaths mingling hot in the close space, lips brushing tentative at the corner of my mouth, tasting salt from the night's tension and faint coffee linger. No more pulling back, she whispered, hand steady on my waist now, fingers curling through my shirt's fabric, pressing firm against the curve there, grounding the surrender in warmth that spread low, body arching slight into her hold. I mirrored it, palm flat on her back, feeling muscles shift under sweater, the steady thud of her heart against my chest, her neck exposed as she tilted, skin warm and taut where my lips grazed brief. Suggestive murmurs edged in, her voice dropping. This, us. It's deeper than any data. Breath warm on my ear, the words pulling a hitch in mine. Desire simmering guarded but real. Her legs slotting against mine under the bench, friction subtle but insistent, amplifying the rain's drum. Sensory payoff rooted us there, her touch steady on my waist, heat radiating through layers, grounding the arc from buried conflict to this connection. Desires no longer hidden, but woven into the work we'd claimed. The city's blur outside faded to background, our hands unlacing slow as we packed, her fingers lingering on mine during the zip of bags, eyes meeting with quiet promise. Reflection settled in my chest. The pull from that first handshake, the risks navigated like faulty models, now yielding to resilience shared. Her presence no longer a distraction, but the steady undercurrent. We'd step into the rain together soon. But here, in the lab's hush, surrender felt like home. Breaths sinking final as thunder grumbled distant. City hum faded as we stepped out together, hands brushing in the downpour, rain slicking our skin like a shared secret. This pull, once buried, now roots deep in our shared world. If you felt that quiet tension build, share your story below. Subscribe for more Sapphic truths unfolding.